You are listening into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast, Episode 3, Building a Better Villain. Today, Jared and I talk about what makes up a good villain, how to improve your villains, and how to give your villains better motivations in your game. If you'd like to participate in the discussion or leave a comment for us, you can reach us at levelupyourgamingpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you like what you're listening to, please hit that subscribe button, leave us a review, or tell a friend. Now sit back and enjoy the episode. Welcome into the Level Up Your Gaming Podcast. My name's Aaron, and across from me is the man who cracked the Liberty Bell, the son of the Commonwealth, Jared. How you doing, my friend?
Good, buddy. How are you doing? I love that. Son of the Commonwealth. Still need to get that tattooed.
So today we're going to be talking about building a better villain. But before we do, tell me what's going on in your life. How you doing, man?
Doing all right. On vacation from work. Nice long break. Very much enjoying it. A lot of good time, friends, family.
Sounds good. I mean, it is around the holiday time, so it's nice to have that time off, right?
Yeah. How's everything going in your world?
It's going good. Can't complain. I've had the week off. I've been doing a lot of stuff with the family. Just kind of running all over the place, and still trying to have some time to build up a good game, and get some of that me time in there as well. So
that time management is difficult, to say the least. The finding that time to sit, develop without distraction can be immensely difficult.
Yeah, I mean, especially you've got kind of your game process as it goes as a whole. So I mean, I'm sure getting that time for you as well is super important. And I mean, that kind of brings us right into what we want to talk about, which is, when you build a game, Jared, you don't just build the game, you build the villain.
The villain.
All right. So.
Oh yeah, because as a storyteller, and I think for our listeners who are storytellers or even players, villains are they're the other side of the coin, the opposite side of your protagonists. And as your protagonists are well-developed characters with histories and backgrounds and skill sets and personalities and voices sometimes, so too must be the villain. The villain has to have that equal share in the story. For example, actually I don't have an example.
I mean, I kind of get what you're trying to say, which is your villain has to be, I mean, at the end of your story, your players are going to go against an antagonist that you're going to put in front of them. That antagonist can be, a threat that's bigger than one person, but typically, I think most people think of the villain coming in as being that one antithesis of a person, that you're going to have in front of you.
Oh, absolutely. And I finally did come up with that the example. You got Batman and your Joker. Mm-hmm. You have as much focus on the origin of Batman as you do confusion around the surrounding the origin of the Joker. Superman to the Lex Luthor. Mm-hmm. Yes, these are all DC references. Fine. Professor Xavier to Magneto. There you go. For all of our Marvel listeners. Okay, disclaimer, I grew up Marvel, and as I matured,
But you're pretty hardcore DC, right?
Pretty hardcore DC now.
We're not going to get into that debate. We can have a whole separate podcast on just the Marvel versus DC.
There is a podcast, literally, it's just a fight between Marvel and DC. But no, both are great publishers. Both are great stories. So, how to build a better villain? Like I always talk about, it's always about tools. So for this one, the one thing that I always start off with, the one thing that I'm always looking at pretty much consistently when I start off with a villain, is not only is he to be the antithesis of my protagonists, he needs to have the skill set to challenge them. So we always talk about the hero's journey. Mm-hmm. The hero's journey comes from your Luke Skywalker who doesn't know, who's taking out womp rats in his tea, whatever.
Boy, this isn't going to play well with the audience, Jared. I'm just going to put that. No, I'm just kidding.
Shoot. I really hope my mother doesn't listen to this. But he eventually becomes the Jedi. Confident in his skills, excellent with his lightsaber. But he had a villain that challenged him to become better in the Force. Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. He had the skill set that would challenge Luke in the way that the hero needed to develop. and that was his development in the Force.
Mm-hmm.
So when you sit down with your NPC and you go, okay, well, I got this great story, and I want to create this villain. Does he have the skill set with the characters that are going to be involved in either your campaign, your chronicle, your mission? Does he have that skill set to challenge your players in the direction that they want to create their characters in?
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got your ranger.
Yeah.
He wants to turn him into a master archer.
Mm-hmm.
Does your villain have a skill that will challenge him to need to become a master archer? And that could be in the traps that he lays. It could be in the henchmen that he sends against them.
Are you speaking to a villain in terms of a villain in a long chronicle, giving growth to the character? Because I mean, if you're running like a one shot or like a short game, maybe a couple night game, I mean, I don't know if you're going to have the sort of growth of a hero.
Absolutely.
Necessarily.
Oh yeah, no. For your one shot games, and you bring up a good point. For your one shot games, you can really run the gambit on your bad guy, because it's a one night game. You're not seeking those kinds of connections. You're not seeking that relationship between the protagonist and the antagonist.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things about that is you always have to look into. And like I said, you brought up a good point. Is how far do I want this villain to go? Do I want him to be my Moriarty to my Sherlock Holmes, or do I want him to be, I don't know, Parasite in Superman? Shows up every once in a while, causes some
havoc. It's him again.
Darn Parasite.
Or is he going to be a one-time throwaway type villain that you're going to have the players defeat this villain and they're never going to be a thing again?
Correct. And even with your one-time villain, what is this villain going to bring to the character?
Mm-hmm.
What growth? Even in your one-shots.
Mm-hmm.
What growth is it going to bring to your player then?
Mm-hmm.
Does your player learn something new? Take on an adversary in a new, different way that expands their mind and expands their skill as a player?
Well, we've been playing a lot of Monster of the Week in the game series that we've been doing. We call it our investigation series, but this is kind of the investigation series V2. So we're kind of doing Monster of the Week right now. I don't necessarily know if any of the monsters themselves instill a lot of growth within the characters, but the story is more like the villain in this case. The story grows the characters case to case.
Absolutely. But, let's take, for example, one of my stories in that investigation series, Red Leg. I had designed a supernatural beast that was an intelligent predator.
Yes.
I think you guys, in the short of, even though that was a one-time monster, had grown substantially as investigators looking at different things, but it was also the story involved too. You're absolutely right. Story is
because huge. I think that it was kind of like an apex predator, one of those types of things where we probably would have had to. We learned a lot about the predator to be able to capture it, but I think that we also would have had to invest a lot in tracking and things like that to be able to hunt down the predator at some point.
Absolutely. The other thing that I always look at when I create a villain, especially in long-term villains, is motivation.
Mm-hmm. That's huge. I mean, you got to have motivation in your villains. If your villain doesn't have motivation, it's kind of like, what's the point of your villain?
Right. Why does he get up in the morning? Why does he want to rob the bank?
Can you even call them a villain if they don't have motivation?
Exactly. They're just an NPC at that point, a jerk NPC that gets in my way. But when they have motivation, you truly transform the NPC. So, for example, I've seen a lot, and I guess I probably built quite a few NPCs who are bad just for the sake of being bad.
Yes, and I think that's probably the easy way out, is that a lot of people will build an NPC and just say they are evil, or they are the primordial force of evil. I mean, in White Wolf, you kind of have that out all the time with they're of the worm.
They're infected of the worm.
Yeah.
They're bad.
Oh, they're bad. They're bad.
Terrible.
They're bad. Oh, they're Sabat. They're bad.
And it gives you an inexcusable, or I guess an undeniable and completely excusable path to violence against them. Well, they're evil.
They're evil. It's got to shoot them.
Yes.
They got no heart. Like I don't think there's ever a situation where we would have questioned the motivations of those villains. And I mean, I don't know what exists there in D&D, but there's probably something similar where it's just like, oh, these guys who are always bad, they're never good.
Like a lich.
Yeah.
A lich. They're always horrible sorcerers that are seeking nothing but immortality via the undead, and they're always bad guys.
Yes.
And unless, your player wants to become a lich, that's always a fun path that I've seen many of my friends take. Not so much with my core gaming group, but some of my side gaming groups that I did earlier, they always wanted to become a lich.
Son of a lich.
Son of a lich. I'm going to use that now. So, motivation. Motivation is always bred from experience. For example, bank robbers generally have very simple motivation. Money. Well, why does anyone want money? Well, money's nice to have, but generally it's born out of poverty or experiences in poverty, a lack of opportunity. And there's multiple movies you can cite where you see that the villain, they have some sort of troubled backstory. And this even goes to the point of truly evil people. You can even, I guess this is the part where I switch on for more mature audiences. You look at serial killers, even serial killers. Nowadays, with the amount of science and research into these particular people, criminals. Mostly I learned the research and science because my wife is obsessed in studying serial killers. I'm pretty sure we could get her in here and she could name like 15 of them. Sometimes it worries me at night.
Watching a lot of weird Netflix documentaries right now, and you're like, am I going to wake up tomorrow, babe?
Please don't poison me. I don't want to die by cyanide. I want to live. I say that today. Please, baby, put cyanide in my Cheerios. I don't want to go to work. Can't I just die? It's easier.
By the way, that would be a terrible villain.
Yes.
Poison your Cheerios.
Son of a lich. Poison my Cheerios. But even these people have very stereotypical backstories. And if you do your research on a lot of serial killers, they're very similar when you get down to their childhood. And it's generally very traumatic. You don't have to go that deep or that dark. Note to all storytellers, GMs, and DMs.
Yeah, I mean, basically what you're going to end up doing is you're going to try to craft a villain that your heroes believe that they are doing the things they are doing for the reasons that their motivation makes sense to the players themselves.
Yes.
So craft it based upon your players' involvement in how in depth they want to get into the backstory of your villain, because otherwise it's just kind of your own thing aside from that, and your players may not care as much to that effect. But it's really important to you just kind of craft it about your players. I mean, we did that whole episode on KYP. I mean, if your players don't really care what the motivations are, I mean, you might not spend as much time doing it. But if you give it that little extra flavor, yep. you add a pinch of salt to something that doesn't have any salt. Boy, it really makes it really stand out. Salt is a huge seasoning. You need that to make things. It goes a long way. A little goes a long way.
Could not have said that better myself. Like, honestly, that nail on the head. Absolutely. You always look at that moderation. Like, if you have a bunch of players, and again, we'll refer to Robin's Law, that maximum crunchiness factor. Mm-hmm. They want to hack and slash their way through the dungeon. Yes, you could technically get away with very little motivation, but try to put that in. Try to elicit that, because remember, as a storyteller, you're looking not only for the growth of the character, the growth of your players, and the growth of yourself as a storyteller.
Yes.
Like, oh man, I'm just going to put a little pinch in there.
See what that little dash of something does, because that might make the players more interested in shifting away from a super hack and slash to finding out more about a more overarching villain. It also allows you to bring in villains that just have more flavor to them where the characters form that relationship against them, and kind of a big antithesis of like a chronicle you have. So like you have like the Dark King who arises, and the players are like, well, he's bad because he's the Dark King, but also maybe you go around, you find out that the Dark King wasn't always such a bad guy, and like you start to learn a little bit about his history, and the players really want to dive into that. They want to know everything about it. Okay, well, what is it? It's like we're reading. At that point, you're literally writing the fantasy novel in front of you, and your players, if they're invested into that, and like if just that little bit took them that far, you'll know if they want more. You'll know if they want a second helping. Just keep giving me that, okay?
We want more Sauls. and really that dash is so crucial if you're just starting out. And also always play to your audience, because one of our big things about our podcast is multi-spectrum.
Yes.
All sorts of different gamers. If you're the father of young gamers and you yourself are starting off and listen to our podcast trying to get some helpful tips, if you're running a good old game of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, let's not go too dark into the Shredder's history.
The Shredder doesn't need to be shredding up humans or something.
Just a scar is enough to put your point across. Always understand your history and how dark you can take things. I know with my players, I'm very blessed in having very mature players who are willing to go down very emotional rabbit holes with me, and know where you can take those players and make sure that there's always that open dialogue that your players can come to you and be like, I'm not comfortable going to this level of darkness.
Yeah, but you've evolved your villains quite a bit. This is kind of the key to this whole podcast here, is kind of the evolution over the last couple of years and how you've created your villains.
Yeah.
Because, you look back on some of our previous villains, like I said, they were just evil because they were evil. They were part of the worm. They're part of the dark side. Cut
them up.
They're a Sith. They've got to be evil.
Sith, double cut them up.
Yes. So we know that they're supposed to be evil, but you kind of made a big leap. We ended up doing a game called the Shattered Sphere, is what the Chronicle was called, and I just remember the moment that we realized who the villain was, and him sitting across from us, and him being so calm and like, oh my God, like he knows and we know.
He knows that you know that we know that he's the bad guy, and he is clearly very calm about this.
And there's so much more to him, and we learned so much about his backstory as you went on with this chronicle, which was it was incredible to kind of find out like how he became who he was. You took us back to like a past scene where we saved his life, and I was like, no,
actually the ones who saved him. Oh God, that was deep. Yeah, and you found out why he hated a group called the Technocracy.
Yes.
If you're into White Wolf, they're evil, but they're evil for the good of man. Probably one of my favorite villains. So another tool that I wanted to talk about was their organization. A lot of our villains, especially your long-term villains, or even if you're doing Monster of the Week and you want to tie them all back to a central villain, is how do they develop their organization? I really hate to keep going on serial killers. That's dark. Some dark stuff, but...
This episode might be a little dark. Okay, I'll put a disclaimer at the beginning of this so you can hide your children.
Maybe you listen to the one after. But if you look at the crazy guy with the swastika in his head.
Him. Okay.
I created the cult out in the middle of the desert.
Charlie Manson?
Charlie Manson, thank you. If only we had Allie here, she would have been like swastika in his head, Charlie Manson. Let me tell you about his 4 individual people. But you look at Charlie Manson, he used charisma, utilized drugs to get people to believe that he was the Messiah, and that he would bring about the apocalypse and Helter Skelter and a whole bunch of other stuff that, crazy talk. But that's how he developed his organization. He used women to bring people in, laden them with drugs, created an aura around him.
Mm.
You can go and look at so many of these people and say, how did they develop? How do they draw people to their cause? Is it just money? Well, then if you're looking at just money, I want you to postulate as a storyteller, a DM, a GM, where do they go to rent their henchmen? Because you can't just go to a random guy and be like, here's 50 credits.
You don't show up at Home Depot tomorrow and be like, any henchmen around?
Any henchmen? I got 50 credits. I need some security on the Death Star. ASAP. You don't go to a colony and go, I need 15 really angry Klingons. How do they obtain their connections? Are they personal connections? Do these personal connections grow from multiple? Does he send people out? Does he use a spell? How does he grow his organization?
If you're playing a system, you might have answers to that within the system. Ken always points to Warhammer 40K. But even if that's the case, the game is supposed to be designed that you are allowed to take what is written and modify it slightly to make it fit better. So, if it's just like, well, people just follow him because he's evil, like that's not a very good motivation in general. I mean, people might again, it's up to your players. They might be like, that's great, but you might want to be like, hey, I want to take this one step further and just say, yeah, he motivates them because he's evil, but there's also a lot of people who believe in the cause.
And that's the scarier organization is the people who have commitment to cause,
Mm-hmm.
who are willing to sacrifice for that cause. Time and time again, I'm a terrible addict to Pinterest. Horrible. Again, this is the influence of my wife. She was like, they have geek stuff on Pinterest. I was like, I'll be the judge of that. And now I have like boards and all sorts of just awful time-consuming, media-consuming boards. But there was one that was specifically goes on Star Wars, and I'm sorry for all my Star Trek friends out there. As I am actually mainly a Trekkie, not mainly Star Wars, but Star Wars it's generated a lot more talk lately.
There happens to be, a movie that just came out pretty recently, so it's just kind of relevant at the moment.
It's very relevant at this point in time. But it says, tell me the story of Imperials that are there believing that they defend, these stormtroopers that are out there believing that they defend civilization from all the darkness that's out there. Mm-hmm. Tell me this story about the stormtroopers who are all about each other and brotherhood. I don't stand here for the Emperor. I stand here for the man next to me, mm-hmm. Which is very common in military organizations. Mm-hmm. I'm there because my brother is here. Mm-hmm. So when you create those organizations, look at the methodology that they use in recruitment. Because Aaron, you hit the nail on the head when you're like, they don't just join for being evil. Like, someone tells me like, hey, I'm gonna go.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't just join out of fear either. I mean, it's not like fear is not the best motivator actually.
No.
And so you do have to think about this in terms of and Star Wars is actually a good example of this. I know that most of if you follow all the stuff back with the clones and stuff, but when you get to the actual Empire, the Stormtroopers are all different people. They're people working in this empire, okay? And they're not just doing
Joe, also known as PK-143.
Yeah, they're not just people who are there because they were forced into servitude. I'm sure some are.
Oh yeah.
But I'm saying that probably there's a lot of them that are like, I'm going to enlist in the Empire. Okay, you have to look at it in this grander thing, which is, I'm going to go into the Empire because they've got a good pension and a 401k or something like that. I don't know.
Opportunities to go to college.
Yeah. So there are people who are probably very proud to be working in the Empire, but that's never divulged through the story
of Luke.
Because the story is well, these are bad people and we're good people. And it's very simple that, but to give that little dash there, or if you're going to tell that story, you're going to find out about a company in the Empire or something, or this group of stormtroopers, maybe they're a special forces group that they had been part of the rebellion and they fell out, and so maybe there's this connection that always draws them back to the rebellion that maybe your players could turn them. There's other ways to skin a cat and to handle your villain, which kind of gives it that bigger, broader story, which again is building a better villain. Do you always have to defeat the villain at the end, or does defeat mean that you can take the villain back and bring them back across the line and have them join your side? Like,
is defeat for the villain redemption?
Yes.
Getting them. There you go, inspiration in a box.
And we'll get into win conditions.
Take that across state lines. We'll get across state lines.
We'll get into win conditions later, but that's one that's right there. I mean, like a lot of the story in Star Wars is based upon redeeming the dark side and bringing them back to the light.
Absolutely. So. And it's just that redemption. Whew, good one right there. That was solid. I really do hope somebody takes that across state lines. Indiana.
I wouldn't be surprised if I see it in one of our future games, but I'm just saying. So.
Looking at you, Wisconsin. That's just so true. And that actually brings me to the next point is if you do have the long-running villain, this comes from years of experience. This is the voice of over 20 years of storytelling. Make sure your villain has an escape/backup plan. Many villains, especially my younger gaming, would love to pontificate in front of their heroes. Got you in my trap. And again, we mostly play modern games, so one of my players would inevitably say, well, I draw my pistol and I shoot him in the head. And I'm like, huh?
But he was telling you his monologue. He was giving you. He was being a villain. How could you do that to him?
And for the love of God, just do not allow your villain that you want to be in there, continuously into that area of vulnerability without having a backup plan. Videotape. I mean, nowadays with current technology, he Skypes you to mock you and pontificate on his plan.
Videotape, a henchman who surround him in the olden days. Bodyguards. Oh, he's got magic to open up a portal, or he's got a sorcerer there to teleport him.
Or for the love of God, at least a force field. Something that will block the bullet to the brain pan. Just please. What is their backup plan? Most people don't say, well, this is my plan and I'm sticking to it, and actually I can't say that. There's a ton of people out there that don't have backup plans when they come up with stuff. Okay.
But your villain should be smart enough to have a backup plan.
Yes.
And you as a GM, if you want that villain to be there at the end of the story, definitely need a backup plan.
I mean, if you got a whole army working for you, I'm just saying don't send one squad into the cave to retrieve the Dragon Claw and stop the protagonist from retrieving the Dragon Claw. Send two teams, one from the back entrance, one from the front entrance. Make sure you've got that backup plan to make sure your aren't foiled in a single swift move, and now you're rewriting things on the whim, and it gets messy. It gets so messy.
You could steal the Dragon Claw again later, but it would just be so much better if you'd gotten the Dragon Claw there where you wanted to get the Dragon Claw. So
in a plausible, feasible manner.
Yes. Because again, you're the GM, so you kind of get to do whatever the hell you want to do, and you can kind of wave your hand and take the Dragon Claw. That's probably what you should do if you want the players to have the fight. Okay, have them fight against the first squad, but you're like Jared said, the second squad shows up, or when you realize the first squad isn't going to do the job, the second squad shows up.
The whole time, while the second squad's snucking through the back door.
And so you polish off the first squad, the second squad's saying, see you later, chumps, as they walk away with the Dragon Claw.
Exactly, and just, make sure there's a door that they can close and lock that your players just won't burst through.
Especially if they tore through the first squad, because...
or the second squads are real, we sent the B team for the first squad.
And now we're sending the A team. The face has the Dragon Claw, and he's going out the back door. That's an older reference for y'all.
The face has the Dragon Claw. When it comes to sci-fi, teleportation, technology, escape plans, force fields, fantastic. Modern day, it is so much more difficult. Or actually, I should say for fantasy, it's really the most difficult.
Well, fantasy, I feel like you actually kind of get away with a lot of it. It's an illusion that you're talking to. You're not actually talking to.
The magic essentially, yes.
The magic you can do a lot of hand waving with the magic and say like, well, it never happen, or the villain always has an escape plan. He's got a teleportation stone. When he breaks it, he disappears.
Beautiful. And then for modern age, there's these things called cell phones and Skype and laptop computers that can Wi-Fi connect. There's ways that the villain can talk to the players without leaving themselves so vulnerable.
I feel like, though, in modern days, it's very hard to present the villain in front of your players without exposing them to great danger.
It takes some creativity, and that's kind of the challenge. That's why I love modern so much, is because there's just so much of a challenge in writing for the modern age. Sci-fi tends to, you have space, and space is just oh so very, very big, and it's easy to get lost in the big. And fantasy, there isn't tracking technology unless you've got your ranger who's really good at figuring out those tiny footsteps. But the modern age, I mean, shoot, God, you got the police there in under 3 minutes. That's a solid response time.
But I mean, it just makes the villain difficult to do there. And like you said, in modern days, you would always have your villain show up, or we'd end up in the area, and we never had our guns checked or whatever. And the villain would then go on and do something, and then we would shoot the villain before you ever finished the story. And we'll talk about house rules in a future episode, rules. But we did create some house rules around this, to make sure that we could execute the monologue.
Yes, that was key.
That was key.
Time writing
we definitely broke the fourth wall to enable to do it, but we still did it, to be able to allow Jared to be able to do the monologues, or whoever was our GM at the time to be able to do them. And then you've got. And then you also had other situations where, like, you had players like Nick who would like defeat your villain before you ever made them a villain.
But Nick was your ambitious player who didn't want to work for the, we had the game where we played the Mafia.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to work for the Mafia. He wanted to run the Mafia. So he would take people out far in advance, because if there's anyone who knows the Mafia, it was Nick. And definitely understood how to get to the top is by making sure the person above you is no longer a problem.
But for you, trying to create villains in that story made things very difficult. And also in that story,
tremendously difficult.
Nick, in the Mafia story, Nick kind of ended up becoming the villain.
Yes, he did. There was no question about it. He God bless him. He was a heck of a villain too. And the unpredictability of players is something that you can't anticipate. You can't anticipate their creativity. You can try. That is something that Aaron and I have been both focusing on recently. Is definitely that anticipation of players' maneuvers. That gets
the best laid plans that you have for your villain to come out. Jared's always said this: best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Okay. That's especially true with your villains. Like, your players are never going to move the way that you want them to move. Especially, it depends on how much agency you give your players. If you're like, go down this corridor, turn left, turn right, like it's a very rough way to play a game. But if your players like that style, go for it.
God bless.
But if your players like to have more freedom in what they do and whatnot, it's super difficult to get them to follow the exact path you want them to follow to get to your villain. So your villain is going to have to do things along the way to stop them, and to prevent the players from doing what they need to do. Or your villain is going to have to develop some new motivations behind the scenes up in your head, okay, real quick, to make sure that they hinder the players and make this more difficult than it needs to be.
Just makes me think we gotta talk about later about learning how to dance.
Yes.
Future podcast, how to rapidly change plans.
Yes.
A little preview. It's so building the better villain. You want to make sure that you've got your motivations covered. You want to make sure that they fit the story that you're trying to tell. Is it a one night? Is it a long campaign? What kind of villain do I want to create? Organizations make sure that the organization makes sense. And this is a point that I kind of forgot to make when I was talking about it is, you know, not many people are into the like join my organization, lose your soul. Like, not. Do you have a great benefits package? Like, I need a positive to joining your group.
Do you pay for all the medical if I give you my soul?
Family medical leave act, do we do that here? No. Well, then this is just not the place for me. But you know, you got to give the organization some sort of positive for that to join. So always looking at your organization, looking at the motivation of your villains. The means is another thing. Is always look how do they, you know, like Lex Luthor has LexCorp. I'm quite sure if I go far enough into Superman, LexCorp also designs, you know, toaster ovens, and that's how they make most of their bread. Get it? Toaster bread.
You make a really good point with the comic books, in that comic book villains are great, you know, especially like the real like heavy villains in the comic books. They're really good for seeking out motivation and how to build a good villain, because they are built around like either being such a mega threat or being so like your antithesis to the hero that their life sort of surrounds that, and like they have motivation as to why they would be so deep against your hero. So look at like comic book motivations as really a good like key insight. Like
the best comic book, even though you know, DC all the way, but probably some of the one of the best motivations out there in the comic book world is Magneto. No place else can you get such a genuine, or that I've seen such genuine understanding of why a person would pursue such actions than the things that Magneto went through as a child. You know, the Holocaust. No wonder he would never allow himself to be in a position of weakness ever. And that is that making that point and placing that point really makes him just a Titanic villain. Look at that villain has gone on to become a hero, has come on to be a villain again, or depending on which Marvel universe you're in, which Earth 616, 712, whichever one, but it really leveled up that villain.
Which that's a good point. And I mean, like, and when you have those bigger arch villains, you know, that span your story there, and when they have that motivation in the background, again, like, you get to make the choice as a storyteller whether or not it's going to be, you know, by hook or by crook, you're going to kill the guy, or you can, you know, you can win by convincing him otherwise. Like, I'm not going to make the villain so rigid that they cannot be turned away from their plans.
And wouldn't that just shock your players? Like, we engaged him in an intellectual conversation over some tea, and he said, you know what?
It might not be over an intellectual conversation, but it might happen in a combat, and you wound them, and you end up out of the combat, and you're looking down on your villain right there, and you're having a conversation as they're they're at that moment where your players are gonna have to make the choice: do I save the villain or do I not?
So the problem is you have players like me who are like, eliminate the threat. The threat has got to go.
That's the problem, is that you're going to have players like that, but if you do it really well, and you can draw your players, this is going to be like an evolution over time, because you'll know if you've got the play. You're listening to it right now, you're going like, you're shaking your head, you're going, they will never do this.
Level them up, push it.
Push them up. You got to take them to the next level if you want to do it.
You know, and that's the key. It's really, can I build my villain to build up my players, to build up my heroes, and that just takes it up a notch.
So yeah, I mean, that's, you know, a shameless plug for our own podcast right there, leveling up your players, leveling up your game.
Leveling up your players. That's why I went with the notch. I'm like, is that too shameless of a plug?
Well, we just did it, so okay. It's there now.
Outstanding, because I think we've done a shameless plug at least once per episode.
Perfect. Get ready for the weekly shameless plug here. That's gonna be going on.
Just
there.
Wait till if we ever get any sponsors, and then I will sponsor the heck out of Cheetos. Flamin' Hots taste great on everything. Pizza, add some Flamin' Hots. Amazing.
Well, cheers. There's a little free advertising for you on behalf of Level Up Your Gaming podcast. But that's going to be it for us tonight, folks. Thank you for listening so much. My name's Aaron. That's Jared. And have a good night.
Have a good night, everyone.